Hi, this is Jen Rubin. This is Jen Rubin's Green Room. We're back from Chicago. Yay. That was so much fun. And if you watched our podcasts while I was there, you could probably tell I was having the time of my life. And there was good reason for it. Not only did you see this outpouring of joy, but you finally saw Democrats get their act together. You saw Kamala Harris go on offense. You saw her present herself as an alternative, not only to Trump, but to Trumpism. You saw her reclaim those themes that Democrats have gotten beaten on for cycle after cycle: patriotism, support for the military, support for communities, support for the police. It was a patriotic outpouring. It was a unifying message, and it was really fun. It was fun. And I think that's why you have this explosion of volunteers, an explosion of money. And I think we've really got a shot to win this thing now. But it is not won yet. And I do worry that in 10 weeks, enthusiasm can fade. People can kind of think, oh, we've got this in the bag now. They can go on cruise control. Donald Trump is going to have something or some things up his sleeve, we know, in the weeks ahead. And he's going to throw everything possible at the wall and see what sticks. And we're reminded how much is at stake. Consider what he's proposing. Consider what Donald Trump wants to do with this country. I'll choose just one thing: his screwy tariff policy. 10% on everything and 60% on goods from China. That is a declaration of war on our allies. That is a recipe for international recession. Does no one in that camp remember Smoot-Hawley? Does no one remember the Great Recession? That's just one specific item that he proudly touts that is achievable if he gets his Republicans in office. That would be devastating to American families. That's just one thing, one economic plan. And internationally, we know he is going to sell this country down the drain. AOC had a great line, and she pantomimed it when she delivered the line. He would sell this country down the river for $1, she said, as she thrust her hand into her metaphoric pocket. And she's right. He's going to side with all of the bad guys. He identifies with dictators. He wants to be one of the dictators. He has contempt for people who are nice, who are pro-democracy. He doesn't want those things. He wants to associate with the tough guys, with the big guys, Kim Jong-un and President Xi and Vladimir Putin, those kinds of guys. Those are his people. So the stakes are enormous. And his psychology, his mental state is worse than ever. And it's going to get even worse because with every day, with every huge crowd size, it's one more chink in his armor. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are going on a tour of Georgia this week, which tells you, by the way, how strong the campaign is that they're spending time in Georgia. They're not rushing up to reinforce Pennsylvania. They're making clear that they're going to compete in all 7 of the swing states, Georgia being one of them. And when she goes there, and she's going to draw huge fans and huge crowds, once more he's going to come unhinged because he can't take it. That is a sign that he's no longer top dog. It's like TV ratings. And remember what happened to that TV show. It had really good ratings, but then people got tired of him. They got tired of his act. It became repetitive. It became boring. And that's the thing that really stands out about Trump. He's not saying anything new. After you've heard the shark and the battery story 10 times, you've had enough. After he's called her dumb, which is a dumb accusation, what more is there to say? He's become a one-note kind of a guy. He's whining and his complaining is pathetic. And so people are tired. That's why people leave his rallies. The best shots are those people heading for the exits before he's done. Because can you imagine sitting there for an hour or more listening to this guy, listening to the psychotic personality? Even his followers, who are frankly a little off the beam to be there in the first place, can't take it. So I think that's a metaphor. People are leaving the building, Donald. People are going someplace else. There's a better show in town. There's a shinier, younger, smarter, more fun candidate, and you're not it. And that's what's contributing to, I think, his downfall and his unraveling. Now, Donald Trump is certainly going to go on the attack. He is certainly going to be as obstreperous as possible during that debate. But the real worry, of course, is he's never going to accept the results of the election. We have to be emotionally, legally, mentally, politically prepared to take that on. And the press has to behave responsibly. I know that sounds like an impossibility because they've gone so far in normalizing him. They've gone so far in treating him like a real candidate and in making his utterances into arguments, into attacks when it's just ranting and raving. But he will contest the election before the night is out. He will say he's won and we should stop the voting and the results are fraudulent if he doesn't win. And so the question for the media is this: are they going to play along? Are they going to deny calling her the president-elect because Donald Trump is ranting and raving and making up some cock-and-bull story about how the election is rigged? Or are they going to play it straight? Are they for once going to say, no, he's lying. He is lying to these people, and we're not going to amplify that. We're going to call a spade a spade. We're going to announce the winner. We're going to stick by it. And we're not going to call this a contested election. We're not going to call this an election in dispute. We're going to call it what it is, a victory. And yes, we'll follow the legal claims and the lawsuits and the ranting and raving, but we're going to call them what they are, and that's acts of desperation. So I would hope as the momentum of this race continues to turn in Kamala Harris's favor, and we certainly hope it doesn't peter out, that the media prepare themselves because they have not done a good job covering this race, and they can redeem themselves perhaps in covering the results and the aftermath. And that means finally calling out Donald Trump for the liar, for the insurrectionist, for the scoundrel that he is. It's about time we allowed democracy to prevail. It's about time we treated the only candidate who is pro-democracy with respect. And we're going to have a chance to do that just 10 weeks from now. So make sure you keep involved. Make sure you keep following the program. Make sure you let me know what you're thinking. But I think this is going to work out pretty darn well. We're back from the Chicago Democratic National Convention, which was an uproariously good time with really good music, actually. There are very few conventions which you would want the playlist from, but this was one of them. And Democrats, I think, were expressing, at least to me, a sense of euphoria, a sense of relief. But at the same time, they are troubled, and they should be, because Donald Trump is a very unbalanced, very dangerous character. And we know he's not going to accept the results of the election. We know he's going to lie and intimidate and bully his way through the last 10 weeks or so. So we decided to have back one of the friends of our show, Dr. John Gartner, who has made a specialty of studying Donald Trump's various mental and emotional defects. He now has his own podcast, which is terrific. He has an active social media presence. And he has been following the trajectory of Donald Trump. And I'm curious to ask him, what he thinks has happened to Donald Trump since Kamala Harris has gotten into the race. I think he's gotten worse, but we'll see whether that's John's view or not. And why it is that Biden was so ineffective in taking on Trump and Kamala Harris is so effective. I admit I'm a policy person, I'm a policy nerd. So it cannot be that her, quote, position on issues are making the difference. There's something in the psychological dynamic, there's something in her personality that is much more effective in matching up against him. In sports, it's often the case, if it's two tennis players or two other athletes, that his game doesn't really match up well with the other one. In other words, the things that he's good at aren't particularly effective with the guy across the net. Well, this is one of those situations where what she has, which is this combination of biting insight and raw intelligence with exuberant joy, that combination seems to be working. And I want to ask John why he thinks that is. So, without further delay, I'm delighted to welcome back to the show, John Gartner. Welcome, John.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Since we last talked, when you were struggling to get some visibility on the issue of Donald Trump's mental, emotional health, we've seen quite a bit more coverage of it, in large part because you've been busy. Tell us what you've been up to.
Well, and you've been busy too. I want to give you some credit. You've been a real leader on this. If people don't know, which they probably do, you have used your column to really flog this point, which needs to be flogged.
Yes,
you have, I think, helped to shame the press for not covering this issue. And so it is with great satisfaction, I'm sure that you and I feel that now that they are covering it, better late than never, because we still have an election ahead of us. So I just wanted to note that.
Thank you.
I think the biggest thing that changed, honestly, was Biden getting out of the race, because suddenly there were all these headlines. Suddenly, the focus is on Donald Trump's mental incapacity, as if suddenly he developed dementia overnight.
Yes.
As if we couldn't see it before. Like, look, I couldn't diagnose your brain tumor. We were too busy with the woman down the hall who had diabetes, so we couldn't pay attention. Now that she's dead, now we can actually say, oh my gosh, you're really sick.
Exactly. So now you have a podcast. Tell us about that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so we have this podcast, Shrinking Trump, which I actually do with a fellow psychologist who, we haven't told our viewers this, but he's been my best friend since childhood, which is why we have such a good back and forth, and he gets my sense of humor. He's frequently referring to himself as the straight man.
Very good. Well, that's my role in this conversation too. So has Donald Trump gotten worse since Joe Biden has gotten out of the race?
Yes, and that relates actually to my finishing up to answering your first question. The other thing that I'm doing is working with George Conway on his anti-psychopath pack. I feel like I need to, full disclosure, reveal that I am working with him. But I think one of the things that we've always predicted is that he has a deteriorating illness. So I've often said, look at Donald Trump today. That's the best Donald Trump you're ever going to see. But George is doing something a little bit more nefarious. I would call it a psyop. I don't know. I have this obsession with psyop, spy things. I've read all the World War II, episodes. I always thought, wow, that would be so cool to be a psychologist, to be involved in something like that. The dark side of me, I guess. But what he's doing, and he's announcing that he's doing it, there's nothing secret about it, which kind of makes it even more fun. As a psychologist, I almost think of it as an experiment. He's announcing, I'm going to use this independent variable. I'm going to create these ads that point out his cognitive decline, his malignant narcissism, and also his small crowd sizes. And I'm going to beam them directly into Mar-a-Lago and Bedminster, New Jersey, because you can buy Fox News, local Fox News advertising in those small markets. So with a relatively small amount of money, he's beaming these messages to Trump on the theory that it will provoke him to behave even more irrationally, to sort of expose more of who he really is, and to be off balance and to be on defense. Well, we actually have some concrete proof that this is working, because he beamed an ad about his cognitive decline into those two markets. And the next day, Trump posted an angry post attacking George Conway, calling him Mr. Kellyanne Conway, and saying he can't believe that Fox would show garbage like this, and maybe Fox is turning bad too now. And then in his next rally, he spent like 10 minutes just saying, they say I have cognitive decline. I don't have cognitive decline. Well, that's like saying I'm not a crook, right? If you're in the position of defending and explaining, you're losing. So George, with this pack, I mean, this is really, talk about bang for your buck.
Right.
For $100,000, we can provoke him into acting even more nuts.
Now, he has always been a inveterate liar. He lied 30,000 plus times in office in that debate, which did not go well for President Biden. Some people tallied, 100 lies. He did a Mar-a-Lago press conference, 126 lies. Has that part gotten worse as he feels like power and popularity may be slipping? Does he lie more because of that?
Absolutely. He's very sensitive to losing his narcissistic supplies.
Yes.
And his response is always the same. It's to say, no, I'm not the puppet, you're the puppet. That's his main defense, right? Is to just project and lie about the other people doing what he's doing. But also, now that he's feeling more exposed, I think he does have to almost amp up the level of lying. And also, now that he's more cognitively compromised, he doesn't really have a lot to say about these issues. So he just kind of keeps repeating the same kind of, phrases over and over again. They're letting in the criminal immigrants. She's a communist. She's dumb. They're going to laugh when they see her. And it's not landing. These punches are literally not landing. One of the things that George says is that good political messaging basically arouses something you already know. So it convinces you of something you at some level already believe. So when they were saying Joe Biden was old, well, Joe Biden was old. It worked. But the things that, and even when Trump was a little sharper and he talked about crooked Hillary, I wrote a biography of Bill Clinton. I happen to believe that she is not crooked. I don't see that they've made any money off the Clinton Foundation. I've gone to Africa with the Clinton Foundation. I've seen all these grateful people whose lives they've saved. I hardly think of it as an axis of evil. But the point is, people believed it. That book, Clinton Cash, was published, was publicized in the New York Times. And so people were willing to believe that she was corrupt. Nobody thinks that Kamala is stupid. Nobody thinks she's weak. Nobody thinks that world leaders are going to see her and go, oh boy, we can really roll this one. Actually, they think that about Trump. He's just projecting because he's the doofus. So all you have to do is compliment him and flash some cash and he'll change his views on anything.
Right. Now, he chose someone who has not been well received by the public as his running mate, J.D. Vance.
Yeah.
Do you think he chose someone who was going to bomb because he doesn't want to have someone around him that rivals for attention or effectiveness? Or do you just think he lacks any kind of judgment about how other people perceive him and his cronies? What do you think went into that decision making?
Well, actually, it was a very calculated campaign by J.D. Vance. He pursued a friendship with Don Jr. for a full year. And he had his patron, what's his name? Peter Thiel. Basically lobby on behalf of the crypto billionaires who are now lining up behind him. So he basically did a pincer move where he had Don Jr. saying, "No, you trust this guy, he's good," and then he had the billionaires, crypto bros saying, "No, he's our guy," and then also he was one of the few candidates that Trump backed who won. So I think that all those things kind of combined to cause him to pick him. I'm delighting in what a doofus he is and how we can, make fun of him. We talked about him at the donut shop, last week. We talked about him in the couch. We even played a risque song from the internet about him in the couch that was really, people just put all the crying emojis, because they thought it was so funny. So I'm glad that he's so lampoonable, but I think people should also appreciate how dangerous he is.
Yes.
That if they were to win, I really think he would be the detail guy, the guy in the long black leather jacket, who would really implement Project 2025. Obviously, they're all in on it, and he wrote the foreword for the architect's book. But what I mean is that I think he would take it further than Trump could, because Trump doesn't even have that level of detail. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? But I mean,
Yeah.
when he says we're going to fire everybody in the federal government, I think he's going to fire everybody in the federal, you know what I mean? Like they're
Right.
going to, no stone will be unturned. And so I
Right.
really think that in that sense, I had this horrible feeling after the Republican convention when it looked like we were going to lose that, if Trump had been, if history had gone differently and Trump had been assassinated on that day, I think that would have been the end of the MAGA movement. He is the MAGA movement. There's no MAGA movement. But then I suddenly, now he has a successor. If he becomes president and this guy becomes his hatchet man, then we really could see a MAGA movement that endures beyond him, and that was really terrifying for me. So I was actually very scared of J.D. Vance before I stopped being scared of him and now ridicule him.
Yes. Now, one of the fascinating things is that when J.D. Vance comes along, you see how little Trump cares about any of these issues. He
Right.
disclaims that he knows anything about 2025. He's now saying he's a friend of women and reproductive rights. He is so transactional that
Yeah.
he either forgets or doesn't care even about the most fundamental things his supporters care about. So he's willing to say anything. Tell us about that and also the psychology of the people listening to him, whether they are so absorbed that they know or think he's lying to them, or whether that is unsettling to people who are members of a cult when your cult leader starts saying, well, white is white and black is black, rather than the reverse.
Right. Well, you make a good point about the cult leader. There's a famous book in psychology called When Prophecy Fails, where somebody studied a cult and this guy was predicting the end of the world on a very specific date, and everybody got on the roof with their white robes and prepared to be, raptured. Of course, it didn't happen, and so then what happens to the cult leader? Well, he just said it did happen. It just happened spiritually. In other words, there's always a way for the cult leader to have an explanation. But you're right about his not having any value. So, for example, he's not really for abortion or against abortion. He's not really for electric cars or against electric cars. As my co-host Harry Siegel said, he has no values. It's all transactional. So he was never for crypto. He was against cryptocurrency until he was for it, because now Elon Musk is giving him $45 million a month, and all the crypto bros are lining up behind him. So now he's for crypto. So there's that aspect that he has no basic values. But the other is actually his weird Jedi mind control, right? These are not the droids you're looking for. I'm for women's reproductive rights.
Yes, right. Like we're all like stupid, and we forget, and we're gonna forgive him. One of the other things that he has now sort of taken to doing is complaining once more about crowd size. And it is so central to his being that we had former President Barack Obama make an off-color joke about it. What is it specifically about crowd size that so gets under his skin?
Well, it is a metaphor for penis size. Let's start there.
Yes.
But also it's a metaphor for something in that sphere, but broader, which is popularity and support and love and admiration and power, all the things that a narcissist cares about. So it's at every level. So for him, crowd size is actually existential.
Right.
And and don't forget, he's been lying about crowd size since the very beginning. Sean Spicer's first day, that's the biggest crowd, in history, period.
Right.
So on our show, Shrinking Trump, we've been joking about how he has crowd size envy and talking about Freud's, mistaken theory of penis envy and how that was a swing and a miss. But crowd size envy is a real phenomenon.
Yes.
And can actually cause crowd size psychosis, where you actually start to believe that you have imaginary crowds that don't exist. There was a cartoon of the psychiatrist behind him going, "Is the crowd in the room with us right now?"
Right. And he has that weird habit
that AI created her crowds, or lying about it.
And he waves to imaginary people so that cameras think that
Have you seen the montages of that? Yeah.
Yes, it's very funny.
It is very funny. We showed one of those.
One of the things that she has done is kind of a reversal of what Biden was doing. Biden, in trying to highlight the danger that Trump poses, which is
Right.
very real and very
Yeah.
scary, she has made an effort, and she had one line in her speech that I thought was perfect, which is, he's not a serious man, but the consequences of electing him are very serious. She might have said, he's a weak little man, but the consequences are very serious. Talk about the effectiveness of making him smaller rather than larger, and whether
Right.
that's an effective way, first of all, of rattling him, and secondly, getting the public to realize that he's not this powerful, paragon of influence and vitality, but he's a weak, old, weird little man.
Well, it's sort of like the Wizard of Oz. I jokingly said I hope on my gravestone they'll say he was Toto. The dog that pulls back the little curtain. And whoop whoop. There he is. He's just
Right.
this fat old man. He's not. He's not this big towering figure.
Right. Right. And she does that in a way that now kind of binds her to the electorate. So we're all in on the joke with her now. Whereas
Right.
he used to have this bond that we were part of him and the joke was on the rest of them. She's kind of reversed that. It's been a
Absolutely phenomenal.
kind of group psychology that once you get people
Yes.
on your side making a joke about someone else, they're yours. They're on your side. They see things the same way you do.
Well, also it's the way to disarm a bully. The way to disarm a bully is to ridicule him, to show him as weak, and then he doesn't have anything after that. So in that sense, it is like calling the bluff, or like the Wizard of Oz. One thing that we were screaming about, and I do believe that the Biden people heard us because they're on social media, was you've got to be more aggressive. You and I talked about this when we talked about the debate.
Yes.
What should his strategy be? Make fun of his psychiatric and cognitive decline.
Right.
Be mean, point it out, ridicule him. It sounds like it's going low, but go lower, do it.
Yes.
And what I've discovered is from day one, the Kamala HQ, on Twitter, they have been on it.
Yes.
And they have been fast. They've been moving at the speed of the internet, and they've just been hammering him and ridiculing him and putting out videos. And one of my favorites was, they made fun of his crowd size. And he posted something on Truth Social. Oh, they're just liars. They just came to look at the crowd on 3 hours before they let people in, and they're just liars. And so then the Harris people immediately put out a retweet, a quote tweet of his post saying, no, Donnie, we were actually talking about people walking out while you were talking. And they showed pictures of all these people fleeing the arena. So, I mean, that kind of counterpunch, the Clintons always said, you've got to counterpunch. Well, they are like Muhammad Ali in his prime. They are
Yes.
floating like a butterfly and stinging like a bee.
I like to say that their rapid response team is sort of like my Twitter feed, that it's the wry observation and spare no prisoners kind of tactic. Now, right now, the two sides are in a debate about the debate. Donald Trump's team had said, we would like the mic off when Donald Trump is not talking. The Kamala people said, no, we want the real Donald Trump. And then the Kamala people did something even smarter, which they publicly said that, hey, your staff wants to shut you up and muzzle you. Is that really what you want to do? Sure enough, Donald Trump then came forward and said, oh, I don't care one way or the other. I guess I want it on or not. This seems like 5-dimensional chess. What is the benefit of having him unmuted as opposed to muted? And is there some danger in there as well for Kamala Harris?
Well, I thought it was a very ballsy move, to be honest.
Yeah.
And again, I think it reflects their aggressiveness and their confidence. Originally, all debates had hot mics because presidential candidates didn't used to interrupt each other.
Yes.
There was
They used
some
to be
civility.
polite. Remember then? Yes.
Remember those old days when basic human respect was considered a necessary quality in a leader. And then, of course, we had the disruptor, Trump, who just kept talking over everybody. And it was really kind of to protect Biden that
Yes.
they put in that dead mic rule. And so I think what Kamala is saying is, I'm not afraid of you. You want to try to talk over me,
Right.
the prosecutor? Go give it your best shot, buddy, but I'm going to reclaim my time,
Yes.
and I think it shows a lot of confidence, and I like that.
And it also shows that I think the entire philosophy has changed. For a while, it was you're giving Trump too much airtime. Now, I think Democrats and pro democracy, independents, Republicans understand that the more you have of Trump, the worse he does. Because one of the reasons I think he was running relatively well against Biden was that he'd kind of been out of sight, out of mind for a while. And the more he's there, the more goofy press conferences and weird rants he does. I think, she just assumed not only reclaim her time, but give her time to him. Go for it,
Keep
Donald.
hoisting
You've
yourself.
got the full 90 minutes. Let's hear what you have to say. And that's revealing too. So I think there's been a real reassessment about how to handle this guy. Now, in the last debate, he was lying, he was insulting, but he was emotionally contained so that if you had the sound off, he didn't look wigged out. Do you think he'll be able to maintain that demeanor with Kamala Harris, who needles and attacks?
Right.
Or do we think we're
No.
going to see a much more unhinged Donald Trump?
I think you're going to see much more unhinged because one of the things that George says is he's incapable of not responding to a provocation, even if
Right.
it's in his best interest. He can't not go down to Georgia and talk about how terrible the governor is when he's trying to win the state of Georgia. He can't. He has to take revenge, even if it's going to lose him the election. So I think the thing is that provoking him is going to bring out the worst in him. But I wanted to say something else about what I think. What the Harris people are doing is so smart. They're really doing something different on two tracks. One is they're going really, really low and punching him and punching him and punching him. The other is they're going really, really high and creating an amazing sense of joy and aspirational, hope, change. We all love Coach Walz. We all wish he was our dad.
Yes.
Right. It's this real excitement about something. And that's the thing. People need something to vote for, not just something to vote against. And so really they're doing both, which is so interesting. They're going high and low at the same time. Guess what? You can actually walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. You can make fun of him and you can be aspirational at the same time.
And the argument they seem to be making, which I think people are gobbling up, is we can have fun and lose this guy. Meaning, this guy is a joke. He's a pain. He's a downer. He's old. He's mean. But we don't have to put up with this anymore. Join us. We can go forward and he can be history. That is so appealing to a lot of people who are not political, who don't care about the details of policy. They just don't want to see him anymore. And I think that sense that we can be done with him and we can have, maybe this is too aspirational, but have a nicer, kinder, funner sort of America is really exciting to people because we've had to deal with this guy for 9 years. And it feels like, wow, imagine life without Donald Trump. Is that part of what's going on here? Part of what the appeal is?
Oh, yeah. No, I really feel like 3/4 of the country is basically a battered spouse.
Yeah.
We've been abused. And it's been traumatic. And for some people who really have experienced true abuse and trauma, it's been re-traumatizing at a level that, other people perhaps can't really understand.
Right.
I think there is a longing for, was it Warren Harding who ran on the Back to Normalcy?
Yes. Yes. Right. This is back to sanity. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Back to sanity. Right.
Coach Walz is I think, brilliant politician because he comes across not as a politician.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of the things I noticed in the speeches at the Democratic National Convention was the vice presidential contenders who didn't make it all made very nice speeches, but they were clearly political speeches. And you can see politician making a speech. When he talks, he somehow transcends the politician label and he comes across as you say, like a real nice guy and a real person. I don't know whether that's super skilled or whether that's because he came to politics late in life, but there is something you can't fake called authenticity. Talk to us a little bit about what he does for voters who politically may not align themselves with Kamala Harris. What kind of reassurance, what kind of connection is he making with those voters to bring them into the fold?
Well, look, if we win the Midwest, we win. And he's your perfect Midwestern dad.
Yeah.
You know, I think he really, and at a deep level, you know what I mean? It's like you said, it's not something you can fake. It's not the authenticity, but it's it's an archetype. Do you know what I mean? The coach.
Right.
You know, do you remember that movie Saving Private Ryan? And Tom Hanks
Yes.
is like, you know, he's the leader that, you know, keeps them alive, and he's the sort of almost a father figure to them. And one of the big contests during the whole movie is he won't tell them what he did for a living before the war.
Right.
And then
Right.
finally at the very end of the movie, he says, "Okay, I'll tell you. I was a school teacher."
Yeah.
And I think that's what he's that there's a different kind of leader who is a school teacher, but also he was a football coach.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really important, not just to the archetype of Americana, but to what a football coach really does. You know,
Yes.
when he says, "Look, we're down by a field goal. We've got the ball. We're driving for the goal line. We can win this." You know, and when he said that, I got a little tearful, like, yeah, let's go.
Right. Exactly. It's sort of the Rudy movie, you know, the underdog. We are great. The sum of us is greater than our parts, which is a complete, you know, American kind of aspirational
Yeah.
creed. The two of them together, you wouldn't necessarily put them in the same pot. In other words, if you were
Hmm.
saying, "Oh, there's someone I want you to meet, Vice President Harris," you wouldn't necessarily think the two of them would go together. But they seem to have found some kind of balance, some kind of chemistry. Talk a little bit about kind of the yin and the yang. She has said more than once that they're both middle class kids, so there's that commonality. But they seem to kind of almost cover the waterfront of America so that everybody can find something within one of them that they
Yeah.
can
Yeah,
relate
that's
to.
true. That's a good one. I think one of the things they have in common is this quality of being joyous warriors.
Yeah.
You know, we need a warrior. We need a warrior. You know, we really need a warrior. But we also need joy. You know, we've been living in such, you know, despair. And so the fact that they are both joyous warriors is, I think that's the bond. That's what they have in
Right.
common.
Uh, One of the things that Trump is telegraphing, because he telegraphs everything, is that he is never going to accept a loss, that he's already priming his people to
Sure.
believe that if he doesn't win, it was rigged.
Yeah.
So whether he's saying that she pulled off some kind of coup, talk about projection on that one,
Yeah.
or whether he's saying illegal immigrants are being registered to vote, which isn't true, or
Right.
whether he's just saying, I can't possibly lose because I'm so popular. So if it doesn't show that I won, then it's by definition rigged. So he is conditioning people for that. What should Harris be doing to inoculate people for that? In other
Mhm.
words, to
Mm.
prepare them so that they don't fall into this, well, maybe something did go wrong with the election, or, well, maybe we should, hear him out. What
Mhm.
can they do now to prepare people
Actually,
for that act?
that's actually very smart. I hadn't really thought about that, but you know, we have something in psychology called predicting the symptom. That if you predict it before it happens, you gain some power over it. So it might not be a bad idea to say, well, of course, when Donnie loses, you know, he's going to complain that it was all rigged against him because he can't accept the fact that he's a loser or whatever whatever the tagline is, you know. But
Yes.
to broadcast in advance that that's what he's going to do does give you some power over it to name it.
And I think that's particularly important for the media, because the media, I think, has fallen into this habit of, well, Donald Trump says that aliens from outer space have landed on his roof. The Kamala Harris people say that's unlikely. You decide. It's been this fake
Right.
balance, this
Yeah.
effort to
Yeah.
normalize him. So you kind of have to counteract that. I used to think, gosh, that's the media's job to debunk this stuff in advance, but
Right.
they don't do that anymore. So I think she's going to have to kind of do her own debunking. What's your view of fact checking? It
Hmm.
seems, on one hand, a good faith effort to kind of combat the lies. But does it matter? Does the effort to even treat his statements as attempted facts make him seem more normal? What do you think the efficacy of that is?
It's reality is really in tough shape these days.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding.
It's really taking a beating. Uh, it says it used to be right that there are famous moments in debates where the moderator might fact check one candidate on one issue, and now it's almost like where would you begin? It's like the
Right.
moderators would be doing more talking than the than the
Right. Then, yeah.
candidates.
Yeah, exactly.
You'd have to have a chyron going under the screen, basically saying, "Oh, that wasn't true. Oh, that wasn't true. Oh, that," because it's a fire hose of lies. What's
Yes.
that a term that was Gish galloping?
Yes.
Which actually was based on a person named Gish who used to do that.
Right. Just come out and
a fire hose of like just
lie.
lie. You couldn't even interrupt him. He was telling one lie after another. So this phenomenon was named after him. Well, with Gish galloping, where do you even begin?
Right. So what's the answer then? Do you not do that? I've suggested, perhaps a little bit tongue in cheek, that at the beginning of the debate, Harris get up there and say, I can't possibly point out all of his lies. But if you go to my website, you can watch this debate with a chyron that will point out all of them. Or after the debate, you can go and I will have a complete list of all of his lies. Is that kind of one way to do it, to kind of label in advance? Because otherwise, she never gets to say anything that she wants
and it puts
to
you
say.
on the defensive. Just rebutting all the lies. That's actually one of the traps with him. Rebutting all the lies means now you're on defense. And also, nobody understands policy, and nobody knows what actually happened, and nobody has any memory. So, you're just going blah 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 blah. Blah, no one's listening.
Yes, right,
and
right.
so I think you're right. Just to say, go on offense. Just say there isn't even time to debunk all these lies. You're just but everyone knows you're just an inveterate liar. You lie all the time, And if you want to get specific, I say look at my website. But you're right. Don't get trapped into rebutting all the lies. It's actually the one time I was interviewed on Fox. I
was only one time, I'm sure.
Yes, it was, because after all the hate mail and the death threats, I decided it wasn't worth it. But I was interviewed by Jesse Waters, and I think I held my own, but he uses a similar technique. In the middle of my sentence, he interrupts me, tells a lie, then tells another lie, then tells another lie, right? And so now I'm totally off balance. I wasn't able to finish my thought. Do I address slide number 1? Do I address slide number 2? Do I address slide number 3? Do I go back to my original point? In other words, I'm just, I'm suddenly flummoxed. And I think I recovered. But in other words, it is an effective technique. You do have to think about a defense. And you're right to be thinking about it in advance, because we know what his offense is going to be. So you got to have your defensive plays in place.
Let's imagine a beautiful future. January of 2025, Kamala Harris has won, and she's actually taking the oath of office.
Yeah.
A bunch of people in America are going to be really angry and really alienated. And the more I think about our politics, the more I kind of come back to this. We still have to live with everyone. What's the process of kind of rebuilding some of the civility on a larger societal scale? Where do we go from here when maybe our politics survives or democracy survives, but we have to live with one another? You have any insight in kind of how that is done? Is that just a neighbor by neighbor kind of thing, or are there larger things that we can do?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have the magic answer, but I do believe that when he's gone, the temperature will go down. I think that he has been throwing gasoline on this fire. And look, it's a similar kind of radicalization as took place in Nazi Germany. That normal people become radicalized when a malignantly narcissistic leader starts to change reality for the whole society with propaganda and coercion. The combination of the two, right, makes people get in line. But then when the Hitler is gone, it's sort of like people wake up a little bit and sort of regress back to their mean. And so their mean might have been that they were had certain views, maybe racial views or anti-immigrant views, but they weren't snarling at their neighbors. You know what I mean? They weren't, right? I mean, that's the thing, like, it used to be in the old days, like you could go to another part of the country and you could tell when you were with people that had different views, but you didn't feel threatened or angry. It's like, okay, I'm in South Carolina this week. All right.
Right. Interesting. Well, I think one of the things we've learned over the last month or so since President Biden is that politics is really people. And we in the pundit business, because we like policy and we like legislation, we like details, think and talk and write a lot about that. But I think what we've learned is that some people call it character, some people call it personality, matters an awful lot. And that Biden was uniquely unable to counter Trump because he was fodder for Trump's "you're weak, you're old," his kind of insulting bully personality. Kamala Harris has a very different personality kind of profile. Talk to us a little bit about how she has lined up against him, what personal qualities, what psychological structures she has that makes her not only not Biden, but one of the most effective people we've ever seen taking on Donald Trump.
Well, Drew Weston, who wrote this book, The Political Brain, that got a lot of attention, the Clintons actually had him as a consultant, basically said presidential politics comes down to one thing, a contest between alphas. We're still chimpanzees, basically, in our brains. Okay. And if you saw Planet of the Apes, right, Caesar's this good leader and he's battling Koba, who's this like Trump-like leader. But everybody just sits around and says, no, they're going to fight to the death. And whoever wins is our leader. So it doesn't matter that Caesar's good and Koba's bad. The stronger one is the one who will keep us safe. So that's the one we'll follow. And I think that in the mano contest between Biden and Trump, Biden seemed good. Trump seemed bad, but he seemed strong and Biden seemed weak. And at that basic chimpanzee level, we go with strong every time. It's what Clinton used to say. They'd rather have someone who's strong and wrong than someone who's right and weak. So strong trumps good and weak. And that's where we were. Well, guess what? Kamala is not weak. She's actually more dominant than he is. If there was an alpha contest, I would put my money on her. So that has literally flipped the race at the most primitive brainstem kind of level. Do you know what I mean? That now it's like, he's strong, he weak. Now it's like, she's strong, he weak. And that's the cross you see in the polls.
Right. And the fact that she also projects this sunniness and this sense of fun. We forget there are millions and millions of people, many young people, who really are about as interested in politics as I'm interested in worldwide wrestling, which is not at all. And so they have to have some cultural connection. And the message she is sending out is fun, is young, is contemporary, is kind of sassy. And that is something that Biden could never project because that wasn't who he was. When you talk to and interact with younger people, are they getting more engaged in politics, or is all of this still kind of washing over them?
No, I really think it is making a huge difference. My son just graduated college, and he said, "Dad, I got to tell you, I don't know a single person my age who would sign up to volunteer for Biden." I mean, not one. He's politically involved. But actually, there's been some articles about the group that has caught most fire is young women. And it makes sense. But suddenly, and they're a group that's like 80% are voters. Right? So if they get excited, that's one of the reasons I'm not so worried about these polls that are 1 or 2 points, together, because polls can't tell you who's going to show up at the polls. They're based on who showed up at the polls last time. That's the likely voter scenario. I get it. But you just can't predict who's going to show up at the polls the next time. But the enthusiasm for voting has exploded among Democrats. And I think a lot of it is for the reason that you mentioned, not just the strength issue, but the joy issue. Joy and love does beat hate and grievance. at some basic human level. And so now that that the strength is not the issue anymore, right? Now it really is like, do you want love and happiness and unity, or do you want grievance and paranoia and shrill, self, congratulatory grievance and paranoia? It's just, one is so gross and one is so uplifting at a very visceral level. If you're anywhere on the fence, it's like, oh, John, like you said, I just want that to stop. And this seems kind of like a party.
Yes, exactly. It's like, do you want foot fungus or do you want to go to a party? It's really not even close. It's an active negative and an active positive. What's been the reaction, John, as we reach the end of our time, to the podcast? What are you hearing from people? Are people feeling like finally someone is saying what they have been thinking? What's kind of been the public reaction to your work?
Well, it's funny you mention that. I mean, overall, very, very positive. I think the fact that Harry and I are kind of a team, people kind of like our repartee and our back and forth. But it's really interesting because we did go through a phase where we were very hot. Then there was the debate. And Harry and I felt we had to talk honestly about what we were seeing.
Right.
And our viewers went crazy on us. They got so enraged. We weren't saying Biden should drop out of the race. We weren't saying, oh, now we see he's got dementia. We actually were saying the opposite. We're saying we need to take a breath here. We've got some new information. We have to be honest about that. So this happened. We need it. And we're all very upset and scared, because at that point it looked like we're going to lose the election, regardless of what his mental status is. We're done, and people, I think, felt abandoned in a way, that we were kind of taking a step back and saying, look, we got to be honest. We got to evaluate this. In the end, actually, we came to a more nuanced conclusion that he is aging, and we actually have discovered his aging has accelerated in the last 6 months. That's what we've now learned from performance. He doesn't show signs of dementia. We had several dementia experts on to talk about that. He does have an inveterate stutter, and we had a stuttering expert on who said that, in fact, with aging, stutters get worse because people lose their ability to contain them and compensate for them. And at various points in the debate, including that moment where he said, I beat Medicare, if you go back and look at that tape carefully, as I have several times, he is struggling to articulate, they prepared him terribly for the debate, all these 3-point plans, the Democrat obsession, they had 17 experts, prepare him. So all these stupid he got to point number 2.5 and he just couldn't say it. And so you could see him jumping. This is what stutterers do sometimes, jumping out of the sentence to one they can say. And so he knows that the punchline at the end was, we beat Medicare spending or whatever. So, but he just says, I beat Medicare. Seems like a non sequitur. They cut off his mic. Speaking about mics being cut off, so he can't say, I mean Medicare spending. So
right.
Like, everyone's just going, what?
Exactly.
But now our fans are back. Our fans are back. Yes. They love us again. We're on the same page.
Right, exactly. Well, we all feel like we've been through this journey, this emotional journey, this public journey, but we have 10 weeks to go, and we're not done yet. So keep up the great work, John. I love your social media. I love the podcast. I invite all of our listeners to go over there and take a peek. And after the debate, I'm going to be really interested to hear what you say when we see if Donald Trump shows up, which I actually think he will.
If he shows up, and I have to admit that, I'm not often quoted in the Washington Post, like never. But one of the things that you quoted me on, I turned out to be wrong about. I know we like to brush these things under the rug, but I'll admit, I said that Trump would be afraid to debate Biden and that he would pull out. And obviously I was incredibly wrong. But I'm going to double down and say that I still think he's going to pull out with Kamala, because the logic was he really is a coward and he doesn't, he does retreat to a safe space, and he does know that he does not have what it takes. So I think I may have made the right prediction, but about the wrong person.
There you go. Well, that's a good way of putting it. For my sake, I think I'm at 50-50. I think I'm at equilibrium. Because, and this is my reasoning, he is so deluded, he doesn't realize that she is the dominant one. But we'll figure out who's right. The debate is coming up on September 10th. And until then, thanks so much for joining us, John.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, good seeing you.
And that was John Gartner. Wow. I think he had a few things that we can take away from all of this. First is that Donald Trump is getting worse. And we always think he's hit rock bottom, but he never has. And when he signs up, for example, with RFK Jr., who's certifiable, and when he holds these press conferences, which are so chock full of lies and so self destructive, when he continues to double down on race, even though it's not working, you can see that he is desperate. There is a desperation about him. And as John said, that's because when narcissists lose their narcissistic feed, it's like a drug. They go into withdrawal, and he's in withdrawal right now. He's desperate. He's frantic. He's angry. And his lies increase, as John said, because he has to keep up the pretense that he's still this powerful authority figure. So I think that means we should be very, very wary. He is not only going to attack at a level that we've never seen before, if in fact he shows up at the debate, but he is absolutely going to claim victory, regardless of what the votes say, and he will absolutely try to lead a army of people, figuratively and literally, if he does not win. And he is willing to take down America. He's willing to pull it all down, to burn it all down. That's what January 6th was. He was literally willing to attack the Capitol in order to retain power. So we have to remember that on top of that, we have the layer of the legal peril that he faces. His entire legal strategy has been about delay until I get to the election. I'll get elected, and then I'll make the legal problems go away. Well, if he doesn't get elected, the legal problems don't go away. And he's still going to have to face a sentencing in New York. Eventually, if he loses, the January 6th case is going to come to trial. And if the special prosecutor can dump Eileen Cannon, which I hope he does, although he didn't request so in his papers, but if he can push her out the side door and get a real judge, they can prosecute him for the espionage and obstruction of justice charges in Mar-a-Lago. So he has everything riding on this. But what he really has is the disintegration of his entire personality. His entire persona is a lie. It's built on a fraudulent front that he is powerful, that he's smart, he's a stable genius. And when that doesn't happen, it's like death. The one thing he fears more than anything else, losing, humiliation, that is 10 weeks away. But it's only 10 weeks away if everyone does their job and gets out and votes. And I don't even have to tell you at this point to go volunteer, because people are volunteering in the tens of thousands. So don't be left out, and get yourself in gear and join the crusade to keep this nut out of office. And if everyone does what they should in 10 weeks, Kamala Harris will be the next president of the United States, and Donald Trump will be that foot fungus that I referred to, something that is a painful memory, but nevertheless a memory, not a current reality. So thanks so much for joining us. If you like the show, make sure you tell your friends. They can listen, follow, wherever they get their podcasts. Bye-bye.